And yeah, this is James Farrant, and I'm Thomas Rowland, and we're here just to, not just. I think it's a powerful thing. I think it's a really meaningful thing, and I love doing it each week with you, James. Talking about and trying to share and dig deep into our experiences of faith, which really comes down to our experience of living in the world, I guess, in a way that we want to live. So, yeah, last week we talked. We were focusing a lot on anger, and for both of us, James, I think it was a part of us that has been kind of pushed away, or we talked about being exiled, didn't we? And yeah, we were just remembering that we finished on that idea that, you know, it's easy to kind of, with things that we realize that we've done and we think, oh, we could do differently, and maybe we can get into the trap of thinking, oh, we're doing it wrong before, and we've got to start doing it the right way, and then we never change like that. I think that's we never change. We're trying to beat us into not in any fundamental way anyway. And actually change comes to embracing and loving and at least accepting those parts of us that really fear things, and which drives us away from it, or that really long for things as well. So I think we're going to start at that sort of idea. James, do you want to go anywhere from there, or should I keep going?
Yeah, you carry on. I was just thinking that really kind of feeds into where my thoughts are at the moment. Like the idea, I love coming back to acceptance. I think it is it's such a peaceful place for me to sit with, and a peaceful concept for me to sit with, and yeah, acceptance in all of its sort of myriad forms, really. So yeah, but do carry on.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. I love being there, and I feel really happy there. And as we were just talking now, what should we talk about? And I had experience with over the week of others being deceptive in some way, or cheating in some way, or and me being in the place of having to work that out, and kind of who do I trust, I guess, is a big issue there. And it kind of raised, as we were talking, it raised this pull in me of, well, what do we do with our own? I guess I would have phrased it, and I still would, but it is a loaded term. What do we do with our own sin? And I say that in the sense of all those. How do I accept and love everything that's going on inside me? To a degree, it's always 2 degrees these, and yet recognize that there are bits that I don't like. And one of those bits, which you were saying, James, is this tendency we have to cheat, or tendency to to deceive, or to whatever. So yeah, James, I'm going to pass on to you now, because I feel like I've rambled on long enough.
No, it's great, Tom. It's a really good insight.
So yeah, that tension is something that I think is really rich for me.
Absolutely, and the word deceive, it just makes me laugh a little bit, because my name being James, the root of that name is Jacob, and Jacob in the Bible is called he who catches at the heel, or roughly translates to that, or deceiver, and obviously his name's changed to Israel. So obviously, if you haven't read the Bible, it's not that obvious, but his name changes to Israel. But Jacob, then the idea of the name meaning deceiver, or he who catches at the heel, and just the thought that, hang on, so that's where the name James comes from, and my tendency to be deceitful, primarily to myself, but also to others. And yeah, we were discussing a bit beforehand, and it kind of just makes my head go out in like all of these different ways, where I just think, yeah, so I have this, I suppose it's if you're looking at it psychologically, or like from a psychiatric analytical point of view, a bit of like a tendency, a bit of a tendency to deceive myself and deceive others. And a lot of the ways that manifests is through me saying one thing and then doing another thing, or doing another thing in a way that I know I'm cheating, but on the surface doesn't look like it. And maybe there's like guilt wrapped up in that as well, because then I can feel guilty about it, and I'm like, I'm covering it up, so it becomes this a bit of like a game with myself, just trying to hide my previous deceit. So I become more just like, it becomes a little bit chaotic. It's actually quite exhausting. I don't recommend it to anyone. But with that, what you'd been saying before the call about, having to sort of like diagnose where there's been some dishonesty or deceit or cheating or something like that, and then me thinking about it and thinking, well, I think, and I believe that as humans, we all have a tendency to try and cover up and try and hide and try and I guess part of it is to wriggle out of a place where we feel like we might get into trouble, where we might be punished or we might be judged or something like that. And it's amazing watching children. So I've got a couple of nephews. I know you've got some children as well. And watching my nephews when they've done something, particularly the younger one, when he's done something wrong, which is quite frequent. He's quite mischievous, like to push boundaries. He's that age. And just the ways he will try to get out of trouble, and he's worked out, if I can make them laugh, then I won't get into as much trouble, or I won't be in trouble. Or if I just ignore it and pretend it hasn't happened, or it was someone else, and it will be something that he's done right in front of everybody, and it's like obviously him who's done it. It's like knocked over a plant or something like that, just off the cuff, concept. But he will do things, and I recognize that in myself. Like, if I think I can get away with something, I will try and get away with that. And so it certainly in my younger years, it was more like the fear of punishment or the fear of getting into trouble was great enough to prevent me from pushing that boundary of like trying to see what I could get away with, trying to take shortcuts, trying to sort of like get away with it, as it were. And as I've got older, it's less so much that, as more, I suppose, like an extension of laziness, or like wanting to do as little as possible. And so it again, it kind of got me thinking here, and this is a lot of info that I'm giving you at the moment, but we can dissect as in a moment, is that actually as humans, it's good for us to conserve energy. From a survival point of view, it's good for us to sort of like do as little as possible for the most amount of reward or most amount of gain. So the less we do, but the more we get, the better, because we're then conserving energy for when we need it. It's like a future-proofing, if you like. Or if like resources are low or whatever, we're using as little of our energy as possible for the resources we've got. But actually, in a society or for other people, doing that can have a negative consequences and can have a negative impact, because if everybody's doing that, very little gets done, and actually then we use up more resources, and things do tend to fall apart. But yeah, and the idea of that you brought up of sin there, I've never really sort of married those two together, and it sort of kind of didn't clash in my head. That's not the right word, but it's sort of like I'd never really looked at it in that terms, and in those sorts of in that framework or that phrasing. So yeah, quite an interesting thought spiral I went into.
Yeah. I was just thinking through that idea of energy, it being important to conserve energy, or kind of efficient way of being, I guess. But that being at odds, being in society, and that it reminded me of game theory. I don't know if you come across that so much, but it kind of comes down to actually what's most beneficial for what am I saying? Basically, like what most beneficial for me to do the
Mm.
least amount of work and get the most outcome is if I get everybody else to do it for me, or others take the slack for me,
Yeah.
in some way. And I think that plays out in so many different ways.
Mm.
I mean, the obvious one recently is things like COVID and the
Mm.
implementation. And I'm hesitant because you can jump on a bandwagon against
Mm.
people, and I'm hesitant. But at a very simple level, you could put it as, well, if everybody else wears a mask, I should be okay, so I won't wear a mask,
Mm.
or something like that, where it
Putting
becomes
the
much.
onus on other people
Yeah,
to do the
yeah,
right thing so you don't have to. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that plays out in a myriad of
Mm.
ways.
Mm.
So yeah, that struck me, how locating us in a society changes things.
Mm.
um, and then it becomes about, okay, what are we fundamentally? Are we
Mm.
individuals fundamentally, or are we relational fundamentally? I
Mm.
think, um,
Yeah.
and is our whole being about being in connection, or is it
Mm.
all about being, oh, I'm me and I'm impacting the world by being me and
Mm.
closed off and kind of much more individualistic, I guess. Or
Mm.
so that really interested me, of that kind of dichotomy, I guess, of how we
Mm.
view the human being and what that means. And then I was struck by what you're talking about, sin. And I guess it may go back to how I was brought up, or what I
Mm.
learned, and seeing everything through the lens of sin
Mm.
was often a way to get good feedback in some
Yeah.
way. So that made me thinking, oh, do I mean sin here? Is that right?
Mm.
So that was interesting. What really struck me, though, James, was your name.
Yeah.
And I've had something similar. So Thomas means twin,
Yes.
which has got that idea of being double-minded or hypocritical.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I've kind of felt that weight of that name a
Mm.
bit, of being a hypocrite in some way, and
Okay.
trying not to be, and wanting and trying everybody not to find out in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
The concealing of that part
yeah,
of this, that unacceptable part. And again,
yeah,
we come back to that, or the exiles, the exiled
yeah,
self.
yeah. So I was really struck by that, and I guess I want to ask, like, has that been a weight for you, or how has that impacted you? That link between James and
So I think that I commented it a little bit tongue in cheek. So it is very much like a bit frivolous the way I approach that. But there are times when I do sort of sit with it and dwell on it and go, I wonder if that has had an impact on me. Not so much the name thing, but the fact that I know about it, does that then become a bit self-fulfilling? Or is there a sense of, whatever attribute or virtue or vice or whatever, however you want to frame it. I like attribute because it's like a bit more neutral. That you would attribute to a person, that if you select that out, you will see it more. It becomes magnified because you're honing in on that. A little bit like if you give somebody a hammer, they'll see nails. But like with that being, so the sense that I think, oh, I'm a bit deceitful, me then thinking about it makes me go, oh, there's this time, and I've done that, and I've done this, and blah, 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 blah. And I could come out with all 100 different ways that I am like that, or have been like that. But I think what really struck me about what you were saying just now was the idea of us placing the individual into a society or into community, and then becoming relational, and even if the community's small, becoming relational with yourself as well as with others, so that then my sense, so it doesn't hinge on like how close to the line can I toe, and how like a sense of right and wrong and sin and righteousness and those sort of like quite weighty and almost religious spiritual concepts that we can that kind of can sit on us a little bit, and certainly that we can feel are put on us, or certainly I felt were put on me when I was part of the church. That the more the idea of, well, actually, what's good, what is good, and it's good for me to be good to others, and it's good for me to be good to me as well, because that has a positive impact, and then I will have a positive impact. And again, with this sort of concepts we talked about a little bit before, and so it becomes less about how much can I get away with, but more about can I do more for myself and for others? Can I do more good, rather than how much bad can I get away with? So it sort of twists it all on its head, and it becomes less of a, and I think that's partly where I sit now, with a different mindset of a less of a binary right and wrong, and less of a sort of like success and failure, and more of like a spectrum of success, or a growth mindset, which is, it's a bit of a weird phrase, but the idea of that I am where I am at the moment, and I'm just growing, and what I want to be doing is feeding the bits that are growing in a healthy way, rather than the bits that are growing in a maybe slightly less healthy way. And so I saw this amazing, just like, it was from a self-help book, which I don't usually hold much stock in, but I just happened to pick it up. And it was this, it was called the purpose triangle. So the idea is you put anything that you're concerned about into the purpose triangle, and then you ask yourself 3 questions about it. Does it help others? Does it help me? Does it, I can't remember the third one, but I got it. But it was great. And just the idea of, if it does tick 2 of those boxes, then you're probably all right with it. If it's only 1 of those boxes or none, then you probably need to get rid of it, because it's not actually that beneficial. And it kind of just helps you to, I guess, like assess yourself and more, like choose to be the person you want to be, rather than who you're told you are, or who you're told your name makes you, or who you have been told you are in the past by the millions of voices that tell you whatever negative thing it is. If it's a negative thing, even if it's a positive thing, it could become a negative thing if it becomes what you're typecast as. So it's that was quite helpful. That was a very rambling answer to your question.
And I think rambling is fine, James. I love it. I think I felt that that idea of sin being kind of a real weight that's loaded on us, and I think part of the problem with how it's loaded on us is that it's very much individualistic. It's very much, you are sinful as an individual, and you're, it's these, and you shouldn't be doing this, and etc. And I think where I've gone with my thinking of sin is that it's much more in the system, or it's like an ecosystem where we're all kind of connected to each other. And I love the shift there that I think you made, that it doesn't then become what's good for me compared with what's good for another person. Because what's good is going to help me and them in the system, and then it's not about, it's almost like a defensive thing of like, oh, I'm not doing any harm, whereas putting yourself in this system where you're connected with others, puts you in a place of being able to make a difference and being able to do good and
Mhm.
change things. And yeah, so that was that I think helped clarify that
Mm.
switch of, we just put somebody in this completely different light and a completely different power as well. I always
Yeah,
come back to power at the moment,
yeah,
apparently.
absolutely.
But like,
For sure.
you're not you closed off being a sinful person that can't do anything. You're in the system where you're being tugged and you're tugging others and you're feeding
Mm.
others and you're being fed, and it's all much more connected, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
mm. I love that.
I still want to approach one thing, which I think I've avoided so far, um, and that's this: how do we approach those parts of us that we don't like? So the tendency to cheat, or the tendency um,
Mm.
to, and I think it's right to say the tendency to betray other people
Mm. Mm-hmm.
that we
Yeah.
have. Um, and it might be that we're always betraying other people
Mm.
in some way, because in a system like, you're connected all over the place,
Yeah.
and I think of my connections, then like they are all over the place, and
Yeah.
I'm sure people expect things of me, and
Mm.
there are certain commitments that I've been made that I don't always fulfill,
Mm.
because I'm human, even if I have the best will in the world. But there is this tendency to, even with those closest to me, to betray in some way. Um,
Mm.
and what do we do with those bits where we
But
realise that?
yeah, that we feel bad about, that we feel, oh,
Yeah,
I
and that
wish it wasn't like
are
this, or I
really,
could do something like this.
yeah, they're really at odds with our values,
Yeah.
and all these things that I think we both really value, of loving people, of being
Mm.
trustworthy, and etc.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really, really good question, Tom. And it's like, it's not something that I'll be able to answer
No.
in any like
Yeah.
definitive way, but can only give sort of like, I suppose where I sit with it is just the idea that we we if we're wanting to do the best that we possibly can, and we are, I mean, this is, I hesitate because I don't want to say, it's just about our good intentions, because I've heard so many times that the road to hell is paved with good intention that I can't go, good intentions aren't enough. It is about how we act. It is about how we behave, as well as about how we think, because I believe how we think and feel impact how we behave. Um, but I do think that um, I probably something that's helped me most of all, with all of these sorts of thoughts about, like, how do I deceive, or how am I like hypocritical, or how do I not quite fulfill my expectations or somebody else's, is that if I were to approach myself as somebody else, as so again, it's the relational, approaching myself as a being, and relationally, if a friend were to come to me with the same things as you have just said, I would say it's all right. It is okay. It's all right. Not to like placate, not to, as a platitude, but that we are finite. We are human, as you said. We're human. We have limits. We have boundaries. We have got things that tug us in one way and tug us in another way, and we push and pull equally, as much as we are pushed and pulled. And that we can only do our very best, and that my assumption is that people are doing their very best with what they've got, and that is an assumption I choose to take, but I feel strongly about it, because it's how I want people to approach me, and I can only approach people how I want to be approached. I want to approach people with a positive light and a positive attitude, of course, there are those times when that isn't appropriate, and where you do need to go, hang on, that is wrong, that is not okay, we can't do that, can't condone that. But the belief that people are generally trying to do the best with what they've got is that it, and I knowing in myself that for the most part I am trying to do the best with what I've got, and when I'm taking shortcuts, when I am deceiving myself and others, that I am doing so that there is a purpose behind it, there is a reason behind that, and that although my behavior there is something that I'm not accepting, the reasoning, the person, the individual behind it is acceptable, is accepted, is loved, is worthy of love. And so even like when I do stuff that hurts other people, and I think that it's really important to make amends. It's really important to try to mitigate hurt and harm. But we will. I think we're rough individuals. We will cause harm here and there, and it pains me to know that, because of like the anger thing that we spoke about last week. But there's the approaching myself with acceptance, I think, is probably at least a step in the right direction. I don't think it's by any means a full answer.
Yeah. No, I like that, James, and I think it really struck when you said you're still all right, or it's all right. And I was thinking, yeah, it's all right, and you're still okay. And then you linked it to you're still lovable, and I think that's really part of it. And I guess love does hold these tensions, doesn't it? It holds these tensions of, and we don't, if I think with my son, there are bits that I hate about what he does or how he thinks sometimes, and yet, and so I hold that, and I hold that he's still okay, and that it's okay in the end, and that really, and I think when you approach it like that, you're opened out to see more of it. I was just thinking that I don't have to push it away. I can then see and face like more and more of these parts of me that I learned not to accept, or I learned were unacceptable, or that I hate in me. And I think when you see them, then you can start accepting yourself despite them, and taking responsibility maybe a bit more, and digging into it and say, okay, why is that? What's going on there behind that? What fears are driving it, and things. And that's a much more powerful place to be. It's the place of stepping into taking responsibility maybe for it.
And I think it's all sort of linked, isn't it? Because then it's like, when we're afraid of something, we step away, we draw away, and so we let that behavior be there without looking at it, without acknowledging, without accepting. And then when we accept the part of ourselves that's behind that, we can recognize the behavior for what it is, and that it will, by accepting it, that will give it space, will give it room to change, for that part of us to change, or to redirect its energy elsewhere, more healthfully, more productively. So it's quite a complicated sort of map, I suppose, or concept, but it's also there's a simplicity to it of like all you do is love. It's actually one of the toughest things we can do. So because they are parts of ourselves that we've either been taught to hate, taught not to accept, or taught that are wrong and not acceptable, and then we get the reinforcement of that through society, through relationship, through wherever. And then when you see it in others, you're like, oh, that's wrong. So then that's like a reflection of that, and you get a feedback of like, that's wrong. So they're not okay, they're not acceptable. And this bit of myself that's the same, well, it's also not acceptable either. Especially when you see the behavior in a really negative way, like through, so for example, when we spoke about anger last week, that when anger can lead to violence and to a real outburst of something, and you see that manifest and you go, that's not okay. I really don't feel comfortable with that. Okay with it. So yeah, it does take you to some funny places, but there is like a reasoning behind it. There is, in my head, it goes, oh yeah, no, it sort of makes sense. It's just hard to express, hard to explain.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm struck with two things with that. One is, with all that I've had to deal with this week, I've got really frustrated at times, and now I'm thinking, oh yeah, there's probably a lot of that frustration was out of proportion because I was frustrated with, it's something to do with what's going on, a part of me that I'm frustrated with, or a part of me that I don't want anything to do with. So I don't want anything like to do with that. So that was really interesting. The other thing was, what was the other thing? That idea of the simplicity of it, of love, or of just returning to that place of, which I think was really powerful, what you said of it's okay and you're okay, and that giving it space to almost, we can listen to those parts of what they're telling us as well. Like if we do something, like it might be that we're just exhausted, or we have something that we really need, and we can start giving that, listening to what that action and what led to it is telling us, and you're like, okay, I don't want to be like that, but how am I going to deal with this exhaustion and the fact that, or how am I going to deal with the fact that I'm really annoyed with this person, or whatever it is. So that space almost to listen to those bits of us that we just don't give time to, I thought was really powerful. Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, hearing what the other parts of us are saying.
Yeah,
such a good. And this is, I think, partly why I absolutely love internal family systems. It is this. This is basically what it is. And so for me, like that, it just speaks really loudly to me, because if like I take an internal family systems model of like myself being made up of many, many parts, and my faith where God has come and dwelt with those many selves, those many parts, and is like encompassing and embracing and loving all of that and all of these parts that make up me, and has said, you know what, I love it all. I love it all. I love you. And we're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And that from there, it just becomes fertile ground for change. It becomes fertile ground for good to come from, for for then patience and tolerance for people, for generosity, compassion, peace, and kindness to come out of. And I think, I guess, like, I suppose, sorry, my brain just went in a very odd place there. Just like, we've been doing, hang on, give me a second. Just a
take a breath, James. It's okay.
I take breath. Basically, my brain just went off on a massive tangent mid sentence. A lot. One of the parts of myself is very talkative, and just with work at the moment, being in lockdown, we're doing a huge amount on like self-development and professional development, and where are you going, and what are you doing, and why do you do this, and blah blah blah. and I hate it. I really am not driven by ambition or like wanting to get further in my job. And hopefully none of them are watching this because, you know, particularly
we
but
can
anyway,
delete this bit. It's all right.
we'll have to get that out. But within that, like I sort of kind of went down a little bit of a morbid route. It's like, well, what do I want my legacy to be? What do I want to leave behind? And ultimately, what I want to leave behind is people knowing that people can be kind, people knowing that people can be compassionate, people knowing that people can be calm in spite of the world we live in, the unkindness, the violence, the wrong, the injustice, the disparity, all of the negatives that we're bombarded with left, right, and centre all the time. You switch on the news and it is a wave of negativity, a wave of like just sometimes just horror. I'm like thinking of Sarah Everard and the stuff that's been in the news recently, and you just think, is there any hope for us? And of course there is. Of course there is. And I don't want to minimize what's happened at all, but we can be different. We can change. We can all, by being kind, by taking a moment to be patient with one another, by taking a moment to be compassionate, and by being compassionate, patient, and kind to ourselves, make that a reality. That we're not just paying lip service. We're not just being there on show just to say, oh, I'm doing the right thing. It's no, I want people to know that there are kind people in the world. I want people to know that not everybody is the same, that we do have a choice. Yeah, that went some weird places in my brain anyway. a bit of a tangent.
I love that, James, and I really felt you at that point, and that real reckoning of what do I want my life to be about, and in that all that possibility, opportunity of change and of difference, of and the power in that of kindness. I really felt. And I kind of think let's leave that there. I feel like I want to re-listen to what you just said and let it drop. So maybe we should let it settle for a week, and then we'll come back to it next week. Because I think it's a whole like, wow, James has just said what he wants his life to be about, and that's big, and it's lovely. It's great in a really lovely way, like really real. And really like, oh, that is what life is about. Let's spend more time on it. But I think we'll do that next week, if that's all right, James.
It sounds great. Yeah, I think we've come full circle in some ways.
Great. Well, thank you guys for joining us, those who are listening, or if you listen at a later point. And yeah, that's where we're going to start next week, I think. So yeah, do get in touch if you've got any comments, if you've got any questions. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to discuss anything with you, or discuss any queries, or interview anybody and have you guys not interview, like, you know, but really explore maybe some of your journey with faith as well. So do get in touch. Just message me on whatever the social media platform you see this on. Thanks for this evening. Thanks again, James. Really loved it.
Thank you, Tom. I love that you're doing this because it wouldn't happen without you.
Okay. Yeah, we'll see you guys next week.